Hi, everyone. It's John Arnold, and I want to welcome you to 7 Minute Life webinar today, where we're going to be talking about how to create a daily written action plan so that you go into your day with an agenda for the day and know what you're going to get accomplished. It's about 15 minutes of, now let's see, I'm down to 12 minutes before 10 o'clock. We'll deep dive into content at 10 o'clock. Right now, I just want to welcome everyone who's coming into the webinar. And, it'd be great if you go over to the chat bar on the right and give us a shout out. Let us know you're here, where you're from. We would love to see that. In today's webinar, I'll be hosting. Allison is out of the picture this morning. Sometimes life has a way of happening in ways you didn't plan on. So all our planning can go up in smoke. And that's what happened with Allison today. Her mother is having surgery this morning. She would love to have your prayers. Her name is Ann, but Allison can't be here this morning because she is with her mom while she is going through surgery. So we're going to miss Allison today. We're going to have a lot of fun doing this. We're going to be digging into this written action plan. It's one of my favorite things. We'll be diving into a cool tool called the 5 before 11 and really get pretty nitty gritty about how that works. So just want to welcome you. We're about 10 minutes out before starting the actual content of the webinar. And again, I'm really excited to be here with you doing this. A few things as you're coming through the door. People always ask if we're going to have a replay, and we always have a replay. We record all these webinars. They're available on YouTube, and we also post them on our site. So you should receive shortly after we finish. We'll send out a replay link after we've had an opportunity to edit down to a little more concise content for you. So watch your email inbox for that and our Facebook page when that becomes available. But again, thank you. And I'm going to kind of tidy up my thoughts a little bit before we get started here, grab a glass of water, and I'm really looking forward to today. So I can't wait to see you guys in here on the call. Be starting here in just a little bit. Welcome, everybody. Let's see who's come in so far. I'm still waiting for folks to come in. Hey guys, we'll be getting started in about 5 minutes. I'm just waiting for folks to join in, and we should be fired up in just a moment. Hey everyone, John Arnold here, and we've got about 4 minutes till we launch out. I'm waiting for folks to come in, and I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. Allison is not able to be here because her mother is having surgery. So we will have to do without Allison, but I went over notes with her last night, and this webinar we prepared together. We got a lot of great, valuable content for you. We're going to be going over how to create a daily written action plan, and we'll get started in about 3 to 5 minutes here. Hi everyone, it's just about time to start. A few more minutes here, and we'll dive right in. Hmm. Okay, we've got just a couple more minutes before we begin. I want to welcome everybody to today's broadcast. We're going to be looking at how to start or how to create a daily written action plan. And it's going to be content loaded and rich. Can't wait for you all to see this. This is some of the most important material that I use every day to get the best work out of my day. So we'll be getting started in just a moment. Welcome. Say hello to everybody as you come in. Hang in there, guys. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty here. Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. I'm having a little bit of difficulty here. I'm not showing, can't see you all attendees. So that's a little bit frustrating because I don't know if you've got questions floating out there for me or not. And I was trying to resolve that before we get started. I'm just going to go ahead and plow into the content because I want to be mindful of people's times. If you had trouble logging into today's webinar, we will be sending out a replay, and apologize for that inconvenience. If that's the case for you, I'll make sure that it is on our Facebook page, and we'll email it out as well. So I mentioned that today we're going to be dealing with creating a daily written action plan. Unfortunately, Allison can't be here today. Her mother, Ann, is having surgery this morning as we speak, so she had to step out. But last night we got together, we went through the content of what's going on, have some really great, valuable content. Now, for those of you, well, I suspect there's a couple different folks out there listening to this. One, there might be some of you who have no written daily action plan. You go into your day and you don't have a list of things that you want to work on. There's also probably some folks who have a written list, but they kind of have a traditional long to-do list. In fact, last night I was talking to a friend of mine. I said, do you work from a to-do list? And she said, well, I'm kind of hit and miss. I go through phases where I make these really long lists that are unrealistic. And that's just not helpful to anyone. So we're going to try to cut through the noise of both of those things today. Well, we're not trying to, we're going to. For those of you who aren't using a written plan of any kind, we're going to help you understand the value of that and show you a written list that works, a written daily action plan that actually works and moves you toward things that are both meaningful and much more productive for you. For those of you who work with a long bottomless to-do list, where you're going to learn how to pare down and get to essential actions, those things which are the highest use and the best use of your time, and figure out how you can get away from those lists because they're kind of debilitating, frankly. I used to do that a lot. And I would sit down and say, well, what do I need to do? Well, I would list everything in God's creation that I thought needed to be done. And I'd get done and I'd look at it and it would be impossible to achieve. So I'd be disheartened even from the beginning. And oftentimes I was so disheartened, I'd go work on something else and then add it to the list later. That's no good for anybody. And lastly, some of you are already using the 7-Minute Life Daily Planner or principles from the 7-Minute Daily Life. I still think there's going to be some valuable content in this where you can tweak what you're doing. So why have a daily written action plan? Well, what I have found is if you don't come into the day, and if you don't come into the day with a daily written action plan in front of you that you can work your way through, then what happens is it's kind of like going into a meeting with no agenda. And if any of you lead meetings or have to attend meetings at work or church or school, if you don't have an agenda, you get in there and you just kind of wallow around and you get busy on doing something or talking about something. But oftentimes it's pretty purposeless and you just get dragged in a bunch of rabbit hole directions and not go anywhere. So we want to cut through the noise of that. Also, you know, you hit the day without a written action plan, not even knowing or being sure what you should be working on. So you don't know what task you should tackle. And if you're not involved in a process of what we call think, write, and do, then what I find is the default process is react, react, react. And that's no good for anyone. You hit the door of the office and you go check your email maybe, and you find something in there that's a little enticing, it pulls you in one direction, that email, then your phone rings, then somebody has a question. And before you know it, things that you were kind of thinking about the day before you really ought to get done, half the day's gone and you haven't even looked at them yet. Or the whole day goes by and you haven't looked at them yet. So what is the alternative? What can we do to cut through that noise? Well, first off, you do want to think through very clearly what it is that you need to get done. And if right now you have no action plan whatsoever, I would suggest that you start with creating one of those long bottomless to-do lists, just to kind of brain dump all the things you think that you need to be working on. Write those all out, and then you're going to cull through them, and you're going to find the most important action steps. Several years ago, before I met Allison and before I was aware of 5 before 11, I kind of hit on what she was doing with a 5 before 11 list, which is 5 high-valued action steps that you try to accomplish before 11 a.m. Now, don't be legalistic about that. I have people who ask me, well, what if I don't go into work until noon? That's fine. Take the concept of it and adapt it to your context. The bottom line is you want to identify 5 high-value tasks, and you want to put them at the front of the herd of all the things that may need to happen today, so that you're sure to give the most important task first attention during your day. And so let's go back to my story about, I don't know, gosh, probably 8 or 10 years ago. I was in that place of making hit and miss, these to-do lists that were as long as my arm, that were unrealistic, and I was never getting to the bottom of. So what I did was I struck on this idea. I was like, what if I could only get 5 things? It's kind of coincidentally, this is before I even knew Allison, and we both hit on the same number. What would those 5 things be? And so I went through my list and I picked the 5 things I most felt I had to do. Now, at that time, that was giving me some priority to my list. And it was very helpful. What I would do is I would write those 5 things down in a separate box somewhere on a sheet of paper, and the whole other list I would set to the side. I would not allow myself to look at or work on that long list until I had tackled those 5 items. Now, while that was giving me some priority, it wasn't as powerful as what I do now using a 5 before 11 list coupled with other 7-minute life tools and activities. I did not at that time understand the value of clarifying what my values were. I did have a purpose statement, and I did have written goals. But you want to be sure that those 5 high-value tasks, those 5 tasks you're taking, are coming through those. But even if you if you haven't yet completed a prioritization worksheet from the 7-Minute Life, which will help you know what your top 10 values are, even if you haven't done that, even if you haven't written a purpose statement, even if you don't have written goals, if you'll just take that long list, you'll say, what are the 5 most important things I could work on this long list? That's a great first step until you could later get some of those other tools in place that can act as a filter to help you get down things that are really going to be high value and have tremendous productive value for you. So that's a great place to start if you have no list at all. Now, I mentioned that it helped me prioritize it some. It wasn't as efficient as it could have been. But what I was missing was a timeline or a deadline on that. And when I found out about 5 before 11, and I coupled the idea of my 5 most important tasks with putting some deadline near the front of my day, wow, it was like a rocket in terms of my productivity. Because the problem was with my other list is, even if I had those 5 things, oftentimes I allowed myself the whole day to work on it, and I allowed myself then to be extremely interruptible. And what happened was I would have all the greatest intentions of doing those 5, but I had no intention around a deadline on them. So they would kind of keep getting pushed back or mushed around. And by the end of the day, oftentimes I would find maybe I'd piddled at 2 or 3 of them. Well, by going to a 5 before 11 list, where I had a deadline early in the day that I was shooting for, I don't always hit that. Oftentimes I don't hit that, truth be told, unless I pick really small, definable tasks. And that's what you want to aim for. Sometimes I have a project, like sometimes I have to work on our church website. I'm a pastor. I do a lot of administration of our church website. Sometimes I can have hours of work that I need to do on that. And when that happens, you know, I may not be able to get, that may be an all-day project. So there's going to be days where your 5 before 11 is going to slop outside 11. Again, you don't need to be legalistic. Adhere to the concept of it, though, of trying to achieve those high-value tasks at the front end of the day. And you might have to block out some time for that. Now, what do you put on that 5 before 11 list? I want to talk about a few common mistakes that I see people make. One of the biggest ones that I see times, without looking at their values or their purpose or that kind of thing, they'll oftentimes populate their 5 before 11 list with just whatever's urgent. And if that's what you're doing, you're going to find that you just continue to be reactionary. You may have something that is urgent and very important, and if that's the case, put it in that 5 before 11 list. But if it's only on your list purely because it's a fire that's burning, seriously ask yourself, what would happen if I put this off until, say, after lunch? Would it really make any difference if I worked on it this morning or whether I worked on it this afternoon? And if it's urgent, but it can wait till afternoon, and you have something that is of much greater value, but not as urgent, place that on your 5 before 11 list instead. Otherwise, what you're going to do is you're going to get on a treadmill of reactivity, of constantly just being jerked about by things that are urgent. And that's the way to live. I can know that from experience, and it doesn't provide the largest fruit in your life, the largest meaning in your life, because oftentimes those things that are just urgent aren't necessarily valuable, but they may have to get done. You know, somebody asked me, I said, what do I do about all that stuff that just has to be done? Like, you know, I've got to get laundry done. I have to pay bills. I have to mow my lawn. I have to clean my house. Those items, yes, you're going to have to do those things. The key is getting your high value task in before them. The whole rest of the day to figure out when you're going to tackle those things. But reserve the morning is almost a sacred time for when you're going to tackle that which is most important. And most important can be driven by several things. Most important could be that it flows from one of your highest values. You know, you're wanting to develop your relationship with your spouse. You're wanting to build a much larger customer base for your business. You're wanting to try to convert more of your existing customers into future sales. Those could be very high value pursuits for you. So you put those at the front of the list. The other thing that can make something a high value task is that it has great meaning in your life. It brings you a tremendous sense of accomplishment. It's something that you get done with and you go, man, I feel great that that's how I spent my day today because I think it really made a difference. And those are awesome things to nail down. If you can couple something with it has high productive value and it has high meaningful value, then wow, you're living right at the core of who you are. And you're going to be not just trying to get through the day, you're going to be excited about every day. So those are the kind of things you want to begin to populate your 5 before 11 list with. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment, kind of look back here at what we've said. If you don't have a list, you know, if nothing else, start with brain dumping all the things that you think need to get done. Then go through that list and pick out what are the 5 most important things that have great meaning, great value productively for you, and try to get those done. Set a written action plan for those for the front end of the day. Okay, another problem that I see people do frequently when they are creating a 5 before 11 list is that oftentimes when they create their written daily action plan, they're extremely too generic in what they write down. And more often than not, I discover that's what people are doing if they come to me and say, John, you know, I'm just never getting through my 5 before 11. High value stuff to work on, but man, I can't get it done. I don't get it done before 5 o'clock, let alone 11 o'clock. I don't get it done by 11 p.m. You know, well, I find 2 things are typically happening there. One, they're either in a context where they're really struggling to make boundaries around their time. And some of you folks, that's what you're in, and you can't do a thing about that context, maybe. Some of you can. So for example, if you're in a customer service industry where you have to answer calls constantly through the day, or you're in an administrative secretarial position where you have multiple bosses and you really have to do whatever they bring across your desk, you're going to get interrupted a lot. And some of those interruptions you have no control over because those interruptions are actually your work. They're your job. But some of you are in a context where, you know, those interruptions, excuse me, I just had fly out of nowhere come in here. Some of you have those interruptions because you're not putting blocks around your time, and you could, where you can make yourself uninterruptible for periods of time. You're also leaving yourself open, setting yourself up to be interrupted by doing things like leaving alarms on your phone, or alarms isn't the word, alerts on your phone, so that, you know, you're hearing a ding go off every time a Facebook message comes in. You're hearing a alarm go off on your computer every time an email comes in. And you might be right in the middle of something and you have gotten to where you reflexively go, oh, email. And you reach down and go in there and get distracted. Or you go, oh man, Facebook, what's that? And you go leaping in there, and the next thing you know, you're looking at articles on Facebook that have nothing to you're interested about. So you need to block off your time. Again, very, very common problem is people are just getting distracted away and they're not making any conscious boundaries around that time. The bigger issue that I see happen more often, though, is that people list on their 5 before 11 list things that are just way too generic. You know, they'll list something like work on the sales report. And the sales report may be some voluminous thing it's going to take you weeks to do. And you don't want to put generic items on your list like that. Instead, what you want to do is you want to think through your time and, you know, realistically, and this is where it's really important, realistically, how much time can you give to that sales report this morning? Let's say that realistically you can put in 30 minutes, okay? What could you actually get done on that sales report in 30 minutes? You know, maybe to do the sales report, you actually have to take time first and gather data. Well, don't put work on your sales report then. Place on your 5 before 11 list, contact Jenny for data related to sales team 6 or whatever it is, you know, but you're going to put down very specific, concrete action steps that are definable, they're measurable. You know, if you just say work on sales report, if you do one thing, little or big, or you spend a whole day on it, you've accomplished work on sales report, but you really don't know where you are when you look at that. Your 5 before 11 really needs to be something that are very definable very concrete, very measurable action steps. So sales report, it may be, I'm going to contact 5 people to gather data about sales. It may be, I'm going to spend 30 minutes writing up section A, or I'm going to spend 20 minutes firing together an email for all of the managers requesting this content, X, Y, and Z. You get the picture? You need to have very specific, manageable tasks. And if you're, again, you may have to pare those down even smaller. If you find your 5 before 11 is just getting out of control and you're not getting anywhere with it, gosh, it may be you have to put down, today I'm going to make this phone call. You know, I have had on my 5 before 11 list, call the doctor and set up an appointment for a physical. I was working on my physical health. I hadn't been to the doctor in ages, had not had a yearly exam. This was a high value task for me, getting a physical. And one day, my 5 before 11 list, first thing that I put on there was call the doctor, set up appointment. I went to that appointment. I found out that I had high cholesterol, had no idea that I did, got on medication and did some dietary shifts. My healthier place may have prevented myself from having a heart attack down the line. Literally may have saved my life by putting that phone call on that list. Very small, definable action. It took me maybe a minute and a half to get it done. Okay. One other thing around those. I said one of the mistakes is that, let's back up a minute and review for those coming in a little late. You want to make sure that you have that they're clear, measurable action steps. You also want to make sure that you're blocking out time and trying to keep from being interrupted. Those are 2 really important things. The other thing is that you want to have your 5 before 11 list in place before you ever walk through the door of the office. That means at the end of the day, you want to take time to really think through the things that you need to work on the next day that are most important. Allison had some great notes she shared with me. She was saying, you know, for example, you want to think through the background of something that you're working on. Do you need research? What materials are you going to need? What people are you going to have to talk to? You really want to think through the task that you're going to work on the next day and wrap your head around it so that you go through the door knowing what you need to do. I do that stuff usually the evening before, and actually I do a little bit of it at the front end of the week. Allison just created, and I didn't even have one of these until yesterday, and it's posted on our Facebook page. There's a link to it, 7-minute page. This is a weekly 5 before 11 list. I love it. It has days of the week down the side here, 5 before 11 blocks for you to put in your 5 high value tasks you're going to work on. Over here, these are unfinished tasks, and I'm going to take a moment to talk about that in just a second. But the reason I flagged this is before Allison created this, and I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know about this till last night. I was already kind of doing this in my own daily planning. I would write down, I would brainstorm, kind of brain dump all the stuff I thought I needed to work on during the week. I would sift through it and see what of that was really just stuff that was unimportant, kind of push it off to the side and deal with it in spare time, whatever that is. You do have some of that if you plan your time well, but I would push that off to the side, the low value things. And then what I was doing with my 5 before 11 list is I would try to go down through and I would populate ahead of time to high value tasks on each day of the week. I was planning well ahead that way, and I found when I did this that life gets less reactionary as well. That you're really getting a jump start on things earlier. I was finding that rather than coming in and just living day to day, if I knew that Thursday I needed to work on at least these 2 things, It also freed me up to not worry about them, not think about them earlier in the week. That's one of the beauties of projecting what you're going to need on your 5 before 11 list. Now, I would intentionally at the beginning of the week not fill out 25 of these, okay? Because life's going to happen. Things are going to snap and pop at work. And for me, that's particularly true. For those of you who don't know, I'm a pastor of a church. I can have one phone call come across my desk, and everything I had in mind for the next week can go out the window. Because I can run into someone who's having a health crisis and gone into ICU. And the next thing you know, I'm spending the next 3 days running back and forth to the hospital or visiting a family, or I can get a phone call and someone dies and I need to visit a family and then prepare for the funeral and then have a visitation and funeral. So I would never fill out 5 high value tasks for every day of the week at the front end. I always take, I shouldn't say would, past tense. Right now I do this. I always take and I filter in 1 or 2 things on each day through the week. It also makes your planning easier during the week. You're going to find things that you don't get done and you need space to move those down and roll them over because maybe your estimation of what they would take, how long they would take was unrealistic. So if you do, even if you're using the 7 Minute Life Daily Planner right now, a lot of you are, you have a 5 before 11 in your list already or on your daily planner. But I would encourage you to do this worksheet at the front end of the week. Don't do it Monday morning. Either do it on Friday afternoon or do it Sunday night. But do this before you walk through the door on Monday morning. Do 5 for Monday and then 1 or 2 for the rest of the week. So you might end up thinking of 10 or 12 high value tasks and auto populate this. So please download this worksheet. Whether you do or don't have a daily planner, this is an invaluable piece of work. This one sheet of paper right here can make all the difference in the world. This could probably double or triple your productivity just by applying this with the tips that I shared of making sure they're definable tasks and you're protecting your time. So there you go. I mentioned unfinished task. Let's take a moment and I want to sidebar over to unfinished task. Unfinished task, Allison has them in a separate category over here. And I think that's a really good idea to put them over there because a lot of times our unfinished tasks are things that are, I call them irritants. They're just stuff that has to get done that maybe we're avoiding because we don't want to do. They may not be high value. Sometimes they're high value. If they are high value, take unfinished tasks and start put some of them in your 5 before 11. I will say this, there are 5 slots for each of these. Unfinished task, I typically only have 1 or 2 of those a day on my list, if at all. Sometimes I don't have unfinished tasks on there. When I first started out, I made a list of 30 or 40 unfinished tasks I had floating in my life. These were everything from literally, Allison jokes about, you know, it might be a button missing off of a shirt or a suit coat. And my very first unfinished task I did from an unfinished task list was not hypothetical. It literally was a button that had come off my suit coat. And I kept going in and I'd want to grab it. I said suit coat, sport coat. I'd go to grab that sport coat and go, missing a button, can't wear that today. And I'd done that dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Not a high value task, but an irritant. And that was the very first unfinished task that I did. Now I said right now, I might put 1 or 2 or not have an unfinished task. What I find is there's a cycle for me with unfinished tasks. When I first started creating a list of all the things that were unfinished in my life, the very first time I used a 7 Minute Life Daily Planner, I went through that list and I started tackling it in mass at the, I was doing not 4 or 5, but sometimes a half a dozen or more of those on a daily basis. And I want to recommend to you that if you do that, that you do something that's a little counter to pop culture understanding about goals. There's a theory out there that people push, and I get what drives it. I understand it completely, where with time management, tackle the hardest thing you have first. And actually, I would advocate that a lot of times, but I would advocate that mostly for people who already have down some good, healthy routines about time management. If you are starting from scratch, if you have no written action plan, you don't do daily to-do list of any kind, honestly, I wouldn't start. You need to give yourself some easy success, pick some low-hanging fruit in terms of time management. I took my unfinished task list, and I encourage everybody to do this, and I tell them when they're starting out, pick the absolute 5 easiest things on the list and knock them out. And that's just to give you a sense of accomplishment. It is to get some forward momentum going that you can build on, because unfinished tasks are things that by their nature, you have avoided them, you've put them off, you've shunned them, you don't want to do them, you have no emotional investment in them typically, or they may be very uncomfortable. So start what's easiest, knock those out, and 2 things are going to happen. First off, there's going to be an immediate release. You're going to be freed from the constant nagging stress that unfinished task creates. Every unfinished task is what someone else calls an open loop. And there's something in us that is crying out to close loops. There's part of us, I don't know what it is, it's probably brain chemistry. I'm sure Allison, if she were here, could walk us through what happens in our brain when we complete a task in terms of things that get released that make us feel good, because I know that happens. But when you close that loop, you're going to be immediately freed from, you're not going to have to revisit the stress of that. I'm not going to go in my closet and reach for the coat and go, ever again. And you also simultaneously do get a certain satisfaction from having completed, a boost of confidence in your ability to get things done, no matter how small it may be, it's there. And you knock out 5 of those very quickly, and you can get some momentum where it's just like, bam, you start moving. When I first was talking with Allison about this, I shared with her, I said, it's kind of like in physics, and nobody fall asleep here because I said the word physics. I started out in an engineering school before I became. One of the things that I learned in that was that in physics, there's a principle of around friction, where friction has what's called a coefficient of friction. That's that stickiness between 2 things that are creating against each other. There's a difference, a change in that coefficient of friction when something starts moving. And we all know this empirically. We all know this from experience. You know, you're like pushing and pushing and pushing on a piece of furniture, and it doesn't seem to want to budge, and all of a sudden, boom, it starts moving. And once it pops and it starts moving, it takes half the effort to keep it moving. And I think we have coefficient of friction around task, particularly unfinished tasks. And if you'll take 5 easy ones and bam, knock those out, essentially it's like that quick push that gets the thing broke from being stuck and makes it, takes half the effort or a fraction of the effort to continue to move it. So, okay, let's go back to, I'm going to circle back to something. Those of you who have that long as your arm to-do list, it's 25, 30 things that debilitate you. There's a couple things I want you to do with that before you go to a 5 before 11 list. This will give you a bit of a reality check. I would go down that list and first off say, if I didn't, just item by item, if I didn't do this, if I didn't get done, what would be the consequence? And you're going to find that some of those items, there is little or no consequence to. And they may be items that you just need to cross off your list as irrelevant to your life, and stop beating yourself up for not getting them done. They may be things that, okay, there'd be some value to getting them done, but is it really the best use of my time? Hand those off to somebody else. You know, there are things that my secretary loves to do that I can't stand doing. And similarly, my wife and I, we are personality opposites. And there are things that she loves to do, doesn't bat an eye at doing, that if I said, hey, would you do this? She jumps on it and doesn't think anything of it. Like, for example, I hate organizing travel. I don't know what it is, but I hate having to go in and wade through pages and try to find a flight that fits my time of leaving and my time of getting there and all that stuff. I just can't stand doing that. Don't know why. It really doesn't matter why. My wife is great at it. For her, it's like some kind of treasure hunt, and she gets so excited when she finds a really good deal, and she's really good at finding really good deals. So, you know, that's something where it's like, you know, got to arrange travel for conference next week. I asked Susan to do it, and she does a great job at it, and I'm not stressed by it then. So go down that list. Look at things that it really wouldn't matter if you didn't get them done. Look at that list and say, hey, who can I give this to? Ideally, you want to look at that list and say, what on this list makes a big difference? I mean, what on this list, if I accomplished it, I'd feel really good about having accomplished that. What on this list is going to accomplish my goals? What on this list flows from the things that matter most to me? What on this list helps me live out my purpose to the highest degree? Those last things that I talked about, you want to star them, put a big old, you know, circle around them, highlight them, whatever you got to do. That's the place to start for mining for really good 5 before 11 lists. I'm going to shift gears here. We have about 15 minutes left for this broadcast. And in the email, we talked about finishing the year strong and starting next year strong, because we're now down into the last quarter of the year. We have less than 90 days available to us, and we will be taking what we learned out of this last year and trying to figure out how we can live next year better. And I want to get concrete about that. First off, if you had goals for this year, now is the time to go back and find out how you did on those, whether you really tackled them or not. Did you have resolutions you made? Remember those? Oh boy. You know, some of you went, yeah, I did resolutions and they lasted about a week or a month. They were really important to you at the turn of the year. Why were they important? You might need to go back and look at them. But you want to begin now. You don't want to wait until the last week of the year. You want to start right now in this last quarter to begin to look over this past year and say what worked well, what didn't work well, what were goals that I needed to accomplish, and really ponder why you didn't succeed at those things if you failed at getting them done. I'll give you a great example. After a lot of really heartfelt, prayerful reflection, where I spent a good 2 weeks, I'd go walk in my neighborhood and reflect on my life and what was important to me. I realized that my own personal blog, I have a personal blog called thepracticaldisciple.com, where I help people with tools to learn and grow in their faith. I realized that it had kind of been put on a shelf, and then I allowed other priorities to push it to the side. And I didn't feel good about that. And so I set several core in my blog that were important to me. One was I wanted to I wanted to put out a second edition of my book called Tips on Prayer. I did accomplish that goal. I did it in the first quarter of the year, did it in the spring. I think it was March maybe when I released it. I had great experience of that. I wanted to take and make my website a responsive design website. That just means that if somebody went to my website, whether they were on a phone or an iPad or a Kindle or whatever they were on, that the page was going to adapt to their viewing format so that it was easy to access. I wanted to make my site more accessible for our readers, because this year we now are in a place where technologically more people are viewing from mobile devices than they are from fixed devices. So seemed like a pretty high priority if I care about my readers. And then lastly, I had fallen away from posting and producing content, and I wanted to post and offer more live events, webinars like this for my audience. Truth is, the only thing out of those intentions that I accomplished was getting my book republished as a second edition. And I was feeling pretty disheartened by that at first. But then I really sat down and I pondered why that didn't happen. And what I realized is that there were some context things from my life that I could have never predicted that have happened, that have taken enormous amounts of my time that I just could not have predicted. I am definitely full on in what is called the sandwich generation between my children and my parents right now. I have a son who is about to graduate from high school. He's a senior. He is working on finishing his Eagle project. I've spent a huge amount of time helping him with that, because in typical Arnold fashion, as you get to know me, you're going to find I don't like to do anything unless I do it like an epic level. We picked an astounding over-the-top Eagle project where we created a massive stone structure. It's a prayer labyrinth. It's 23 feet across, 9,000 pounds of material, all kinds of custom cutting, and we had never so much as laid a brick on the ground. Well, that project, which I did not anticipate at the beginning of the year, took months of pre-planning and a lot of one-on-one time with my son, and then months of days and hours of production around it. I also had family shifts in my family, where my father, who is aging, has Alzheimer's, had a stroke, and broke his shoulder. And then within the last couple of months, he has lost progressively more and more independence. I live 9 hours away from my parents, care for them deeply, and I found myself traveling back home to my parents to check on them and to do what I could do to help them out with transitions, far more than I had in the prior year. And that was never a small thing, because like I said, they're 9 hours away, and it's not like I could pop across town in the car and check on them. It became going up there for a week or a long weekend multiple times through the year. And also, lastly, I'm covering someone else's job in our church in part, and I really anticipated we would have filled that position months ago, and we're 9-10 months into the year, and it's still open. So I'm still doing my job plus somebody else's. So when I realized that, it was like, holy cow, don't beat myself up. I set an intention that at the time, it was a realistic intention. My context changes. And if your context changes, maybe your job changes, maybe your marriage changes, maybe you have a child, there are all kinds of things that can happen in the course of a year that can derail our intentions for the front end of the year. But don't let that cause you to abandon the dream. I went back, I re-looked at those things, and I've set together a different production schedule for how I'm going to make my site responsive to design, and how I'm going to put more content out there for people. I'm not giving up on that. It's too core to me, and you need to go back to those things. You may find that it wasn't realistic in the first place. I've done that many a times, where I set out to do something that is far beyond, not necessarily maybe my capability, but usually what happens with me is I'm unrealistic about the amount of time it's going to take. And I way underestimate the time and find myself then scrambling. So look back, see what goals you had that were unrealistic. Now is the time to do that thinking and that writing. For those of you, and I want to interject here, for those of you who are new to the 7-Minute Life, or maybe you've watched a webinar to, you're not using a 7-Minute Life Daily Planner. Whether you are or aren't using a 7-Minute Life Daily Planner, it's a great tool with 5 before 11 in it, and it's got all these fantastic worksheets at the beginning to prime you for each quarter. If nothing else, go to the website, 7minutelife.com, and you do want to work your way through our priority sheet. You do want to work through figuring out your purpose, and you do want to work through setting your goals and defining what are your unfinished tasks. Those 4 things you definitely want to do: values, purpose, goals, unfinished tasks. You definitely want to set those every quarter and then allow those to drive your 5 before 11 list. If you're not doing any of that, you haven't done any of that, okay, another thing that I see people do is they have like this new beginning, I'm going to start over energy, which is awesome. You want to captivate on, but you don't want to flame out in that. I see a lot of people go, oh gosh, I'm excited about this, I need to do all of that. And they just, plow themselves into it, and they burn themselves out very rapidly. You may be in a place where you can take a day or two and really pour yourself into that process. And if that's the case, by golly, do that. I do that at the beginning of quarters. But if you're not, you're new to these things, you're new to the concept of a 5 before 11 list, start with just what at a gut level you think is the most important. Use some of the criteria that I shared with you earlier. And then what I would do is, on your 5 before 11 list, as you start using one, make those activities of getting clear about your priorities and your values task. So it may be that you put on your, tomorrow, your list for tomorrow, you may put download and complete the prioritization worksheet from 7-Minute Life. That's going to take you 7 to 10 minutes. I oftentimes will set a timer when I lead people in that as an activity, and I have them do it in 7 minutes so that they get their gut level first reaction, first instinct reactions down, because that's usually what comes from our core. And then maybe the next day you have work on my purpose statement, complete a purpose statement, a written statement of who I am and what is most valuable to me. There's a worksheet for that on the site. And then maybe the next day is you're going to look back at those, review them, and write out 3 work goals and 3 home goals. Maybe that simple. I would put, actually, I'm going to insert something here. I would do the unfinished task list first, because you're going to have to do that no matter what, and it is such an energy drain having unfinished tasks. I would do that first and start putting some unfinished tasks on a daily sheet. Some of those unfinished tasks, you may, while you're trying to figure out what's your highest value activity, you may actually want to do 1 or 2 unfinished tasks each day as a high value activity, because honestly, in terms of cleaning up your life, getting unfinished tasks out of the way, it really should be a very high priority for you. And you plow through a lot of unfinished tasks, and then it maybe becomes 1 or 2 that you do at a time. Like I said, I kind of roller coaster on my unfinished tasks in that I will create a list at the beginning of quarter. I will bang out a whole bunch of those and then do 1 or 2 a day until the end of the quarter. And then I'll sit down and reevaluate, and I'll find, oh, there's other unfinished tasks that cropped up, or there's something I failed to do. And I will generate another list and kind of hit it again. That's the cycle that I run in. You may want to just get very disciplined about, I'm going to do 2 unfinished tasks every day. Or you may want to look at your unfinished task and say, I've got 30 unfinished tasks. I want to get them done in the next 90 days. I'm just going to do 1 a day for a month. And then the last 2 months, hey, no unfinished task for me. So that's it. It's 10:57. I need to wrap this webinar up. Again, I apologize to anybody who had difficulty getting in. And I know Allison really wanted to be here today. She covets your prayers for Mother Ann, who had surgery. And I'll be anxious to hear how that went. Join us next month. We do these webinars monthly. And I've loved being here with you all. What a great opportunity to share these tools. There will be a replay link posted on Facebook. There will also, we'll email that replay link out to everyone as well. I hope you had a great time with this. And if you enjoyed it and you see it on YouTube, please like it. You might want to subscribe to our channel there so that you get notified about these kind of things that come out. Run by our Facebook page. A lot of good little prompts for you to think about that will help stir your imagination around what's most important each day. And we also post their upcoming events and opportunities for new tools that come out, that kind of thing. It's a great place to stay abreast of what's going on here with 7 Minutes so that you can offer your absolute best back to the world, you know, so that you are living your very best life. And you're doing that right now. You're not living in deferred joy, hoping that someday, somehow, I'm going to start getting everything done and life's going to get better. You know, pick up this 5 before 11 sheet today and make that someday today. Again, John Arnold here. Love visiting with you. Thanks, and we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.